Hey everybody, this is Rabbi Drew Kaplan. I'm excited for this session of Village Torah because this week's Torah portion is Ki Tavo. We're getting actually kind of towards the end of the book of Deuteronomy, which that's right. That means Rosh Hashanah is going to be just around the corner in a matter of weeks. It's coming up. It's very soon. And one of the phrases that not only occurs in this week's Torah portion, but actually occurs 3 separate times within this week's Torah portion is a phrase that I think many people are familiar with, but even including myself, I was not really knowledgeable of really what this phrase means. And this phrase, you've probably heard it, is a land flowing in milk and honey. Now, you probably actually heard it expressed as a land flowing with milk and honey, but I actually prefer the translation of land flowing of we'll get into why I translate it that way. Although, you know what? I'm just going to start off by saying this. When we say a land flowing with milk and honey, I don't know about you. Maybe you think that it, and this is probably why it's translated this way, which is that it's a land and it's got milk and honey flowing, and that's fine. I like to understand it instead of the with, but to me it sounds like a land flowing with milk and honey, that milk and honey are flowing and the land's also going along for the flowing ride. It just sounds funny to me, and as we'll see in the Hebrew, a little bit more along my lines and not using the word with as the throwing in the translation. Okay, so it actually, as it turns out, this phrase, it's actually 4 separate words: Eretz, Zavat, Chalav, Udvash. 4 words. Now, of these 4 words, I think the easiest to understand, the one requires no explanation, is that first word, which is Eretz, land. That's it. That's simple. Eretz is land. That's easy. Now, when we get to the next 3 words, those are going to be a little bit, I would say, more multidimensional than they initially would come across at first glance. So I mentioned that this phrase appears 11 times within the entirety of the Torah, and this triple occurrence, these 3 appearances of this phrase within our Torah portion this week, it turns out that they are the final 3. They're the final 3 ones. So this phrase first gets mentioned in the book of Exodus, where it appears 4 times. It then appears again once in the book of Leviticus, once in the book of Numbers, and then 5 times in the book of Deuteronomy. So Deuteronomy, fun fact, this is the book that has the most appearances of this expression. And although in these 4 books this expression appears 11 times, it also appears in other books of the Hebrew Bible. It actually appears 5 other times. This, by the way, this is some really great trivia. If you're ever at a party, how many times does the phrase land flowing in milk and honey appear in the Bible? Well, here you go. Ready? So it appears once in the 5th chapter of Joshua, and then it appears twice in the book of Jeremiah in chapters 11 and 32, and then twice in the book of Ezekiel in chapter 20. So 16 times this phrase appears in the Bible, 11 of them in just these 4 books of Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. And then we come to this week's Torah portion, in which it appears 3 times. The final 3 in the Torah, and the book of Deuteronomy has the most appearances, most occurrences of this phrase. So what does it mean? I know I'm curious. What could it be? So we're actually going to start off. We're going to take a look to see what how does it actually appear for us in this week's Torah portions. A land of flowing milk and honey. This is it's a little bit of a quirky translation. I get it, but I think it'll work for our purposes. Okay, so we have right here, right smack dab, clearly on the screen, this phrase. We see it 3 times in our Torah portion of Ki Tavo, the final 3 times it appears in the book of Deuteronomy and the 5 books of Moses. We have the first 2 appearances actually occur within this. It's basically a declaration when, I want to say farmers, but you don't have to be a farmer to bring your first fruits. But when someone brings their first fruits in the land of Israel, this is part of their declaration that they say. And by the way, you might not be that familiar with this declaration. It does, of course, appear in this week's Torah portion, which is fascinating in and of itself and doesn't need anything further. Yet part of this declaration that occurs in this week's Torah portion also is we actually say it during the Passover Seder. It's in the Haggadah, it's part of the Seder, and that's something of really fascinating interest. And that's for a totally separate occasion to really go into this entire declaration of along with bringing the first fruits. But the first two appearances here are in that declaration. We have Deuteronomy 26:9. He brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing milk and honey. Or perhaps we could say a land of flowing milk and honey. And I'm actually going to, and we also have it 6 verses later. Look down from your holy abode again. This is what a farmer bringing their first fruits will declare upon bringing this to Jerusalem. Look down from your holy abode from heaven and bless your people Israel and the soil you have given us, a land of flowing milk and honey, as you swore to our fathers. Now, this, just as a footnote, I want to point out this, as you swore to our fathers, it occurs, this promise, back in the book of Exodus, especially in the first 2 times it appears is in the book of Exodus, chapter 3, and then we see it also in the book of Exodus in chapters 13 and 33, this phrase that originally appears, and that's what it's referring back to. And then we have one other, this is Moses now talking, as opposed to the first 2, which were part of this declaration of bringing the first fruits. This one is what Moses is telling the people, so that you should write these, inscribe upon them all the words of this teaching when you cross over to enter the land that the Lord your God is giving you, a land flowing milk and honey, or as I've now updated my translation, a land of flowing milk and honey, as the Lord, the God of your fathers promised you. Again, this promise goes back to the book of Exodus. If you're curious, where did that occur? So that's where it comes from. So I just wanted to establish this context for our conversation, which is these final appearances, all talking about the land of Israel. There's a certain aspect of the promising aspect that God has promised this land to our fathers. This is our ancestors, and this is what we're supposed to be getting. I also think, especially in these 2 references, these 2 mentions in the 26th chapter of Deuteronomy, I think there's something really important, especially bringing the first fruits. It's really, you're not only as the farmer or whomever you are bringing these first fruits to the priests and making this declaration to God, but also as an expression of thanks. We have, this is a bountiful land, and here are its agricultural products. Okay, so I'm gonna really pose to us, what do each of these words mean? So I'm going to take a pause here, and actually what I could do, okay, so I'm going to take a pause here, and I want to go in a totally different direction and do something with us, which is, I want to take a moment and think about what these words what they mean here. So we're going to screen share this, which is right here. So we have, I'm going to do some writing. So we have land of flowing milk. Okay, it's not really what I meant to do, but okay. All right, so we got honey. Oh, this is, you know what, this is much too small. All right, so we're gonna do land of flowing milk, honey, but we're gonna make it so that you can see it. Okay, and we're also going to, just for, for our sakes, I'm sure you're curious, what about the Hebrew? So I'm going to do that as well. I'm going to put land up here and then flowing, which is here. Also, again, we're going to do the Hebrew as well, which I can just copy and paste. Here, so rates, awesome. Okay. That's not what I meant to do. Okay. That. And now we're ready to roll. Okay, so I mentioned to you already that this is quite fascinating, because what this is really clear what this means. A land of, okay, we got that. It's a land of something. Wonderful. Now, flowing. Now, this word, what does it mean? Where does it come from? It's actually fascinating when we look at this word, because this expression actually doesn't occur really all that much in the Torah. In fact, it doesn't occur that much in the Torah, because we do see it. I would actually say, so in addition to these 11 occurrences in the book these 11 occurrences of the phrase Eretz, of the land of flowing milk and honey, we actually do see it, although we do see it in Leviticus chapter 22, in Numbers chapter 5, most of the occurrences outside of our expression occur in chapter 15 of Leviticus, and that's all strewn throughout. And by the way, if you've never read chapter 15 of Leviticus, it is deeply fascinating, really, really, really fascinating for so many fascinating reasons. It is super, super intriguing. But I'm not going to go into chapter 15 of Leviticus at the moment, but I will talk about, but the idea of from chapter 15 of Leviticus, really with this phrasing, is really about oozing, like flowing. It really is like a flow, and actually, if we really want to think seriously about the linguistic similarity from chapter 15 of Leviticus, it actually is more to do with various bodily emissions, right? So things are just sort of coming out, not even under human bodily control, but just there's certain fluids and liquids coming out. I think that will give us a hint and an insight as we see some other texts later on as to this. So it's not simply just like there are rivers or streams even just, flowing of just milk and honey just down the streams. I think there's a different sense to what this flowing means. It's more of like almost like an oozing emission, as it were. So we're going to come back to how that could play out here for us. Okay, milk. All right, milk. Yay, milk. Okay, so when it comes to milk, we in America tend to think milk is cow milk, right? But actually, they didn't really, they had some cows. Yes, they had some cows in the land of Israel, but really the milk that they were really dealing with was more of actually goats. So we're gonna toss this in. Goats. We got a cute little goat. You ready? Let's see if we can get that down. There we go. We can even make it smaller. Boom. All right. So milk, we're actually going to talk about goat milk. Okay. It's just that works with the topography of the land of Israel. And so we're really talking about that. Okay. So usually when we talk about honey, okay, what do we mean by honey? Now, of course, again, in America, we're used to the cuisine that we have. So what does this mean for us? Now, we typically think of, you guessed it, bees, right? Bee honey. Now, as it turns out, yeah, they had some bees. They had that for sure. But actually, we're really talking here about dates or figs, something that grows on the trees. Okay, so that's really more where we're coming at with this honey, which is it's more dates and figs. And you know what? I'm going to pop up a different picture. Hopefully that will be more to our. All right, this is probably better. Boom. Okay, so when we talk about honey, we're not talking about bee-produced honey. We are talking about figs. Okay, some people say figs. Some people say dates. There is a certain degree of ambiguity as to the exact source or origin of wherever this honey is, at least in the text before us. But I will say these are actually quite different, because on the one hand, I'm going to bring up my brush again, big brush. On the one hand, we have we have an animal, right? We have goats, and then we also have something that grows on trees. So we have something from the animal world, and we have something from the more agricultural world, as it were. And so what we now that we have I hope, a better sense of this expression, which is, it's a land. It's not, when I say flowing, it's almost more of like an oozing, like almost an uncontrollable oozing. And this almost like uncontrollable oozing really points up the bountifulness, the plentifulness of this goat's milk and of these fruit sort of juices, as it were. Okay, now we're going to return to our sources. So there's some really fascinating rabbinic discussions on this expression. I almost kind of hesitate whether I should even show you these, because they're kind of pretty fantastical. But you know what? We're going to go ahead and I'm going to show you them anyway. So we have some text here from the Babylonian Talmud. Now, the Babylonian Talmud, I think I brought up here before. I don't know, but I'm going to bring it up anyways. The Babylonian Talmud is a really significant, one of the most important works of Jewish literary production. It was created in the first, basically 5-6 centuries of the Common Era, mostly in the Sasanian Persian Empire. And now we have some interesting stories going on, okay? And this is all around this phrase of a land flowing of milk and honey. So we have Rami bar Yechezkel, so Rami, the son of Yechezkel, visited Bnei Brak. And by the way, Bnei Brak may sound familiar as a town. Do you know where it comes from? It comes from the Haggadah. There's a story where a handful of rabbis are feasting the night away, telling stories, and then until one of the students comes and says it's time for the recitation of the Shema. So in the morning. All right, so he's visiting Bnei Brak, and he sees goats grazing beneath a fig tree, and there's honey oozing from the figs, and milk also dripping from them. And they were mixing together with each other. And he said, this is what it means, Eretz Savas Chalav Udavash. This is what it means when you actually have flowing milk and honey, that they are somehow together. This is a really intriguing visual. I'd be really, if someone can make a picture out there of this would be like a really awesome picture, whether with watercolor or some other painting. I mean, I would be super duper fascinated to see that, because this is such a, see the blending going together. Now, having heard this story, this sort of personal self-reporting from Rami bar Yechezkel, we have 3 other rabbis who tell, this is where I get kind of nervous about sharing this with you, because these are kind of fantastical stories. So take it with a grain of honey. So here we go. Rabbi Yaakov ben Dostai, so Rabbi Jacob, son of Dostai, said, there are 3 mil, it's a certain length of, a measure of distance, from Lud to Ono, 2 different towns. Once I rose early in the morning and I walked in ankle-deep honey from fig trees. So now it's here, he doesn't mention milk at all, but he's simply talking about the oozingness of all these fruits from these figs specifically, which is a really, I mean, it was ankle deep. That must have been, he must have had some really sticky feet whenever he arrived to wherever he needed to get to. Reish Lakish said, I myself saw a place flowing in milk and honey by Tzipori. There's a town, we say Tzipori, it's also in English called Sepphoris, and it was 16 by 16 mil. So he said, I saw somewhere near Sepphoris or Tzipori, and it was just so much milk and honey. It was massive, just flowing out there. And then before I get to this last one, so this is Rabba bar Chana, so Rabbi son of Chana. So he's Rabba, the grandson of Chana. He tells some really fantastical stories, okay? Whenever you see his name pop up, bells should be ringing saying this is some tall tale time. But you know what? I'm going to go ahead and share it with you anyways. He said, I myself saw milk and honey flowing throughout all of the land of Israel. And it was from Bei Michse until the fortress of Tolbanki. And its length was 22 parasangs, and it's with 6 parasangs. Okay, this is really massive. his the idea is he's saying it was just super massive. It was super bountiful. It's okay. These are some really interesting rabbinic stories, rabbinic tales. Certainly, Rabbi Bar Chana, he's known as the tall tale teller, and that's certainly a keeper. But I really, for me, I really enjoy this Rami Bar Yechezkel. The idea of it sounds to me, I don't know about you when you hear this story or you read this story, when he must have, up until this moment when he happened to visit Bnei Brak, he must have been wondering this verse, like, what does that mean, right? It sounds strange. How could just honey and milk be oozing? So as it turns out, he literally just like, I just happen to see goats grazing beneath a fig tree. Probably, I don't know if they're eating from the figs, but they're probably eating from the grass. And that just, they've got milk coming out of them, and the figs have got the juices oozing out of them. And that's such a really an aha moment of, oh, this is what the expression means. So that's just a super really cool incident that happens, and that he shares as a really cool, insightful story for understanding our expression that appears 11 times in the Torah. Okay, so Rashi, we've mentioned him here before. We also, when we had Edie, our summer fellow, she definitely expressed her admiration for the great commentator known as Rashi. And so he simply says, you have milk flowing from the goats and honey flows from the dates and from the figs. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. That's where all this is coming from. Then we have Ramban, who lived later, Spanish commentator. And what he actually goes on, so what we just saw with the comment from Rashi really is just simply, this is what the expression means. When we talk about milk, where is it coming from? When we talk about honey, where is it coming from? Ramban actually goes into it a lot further, and he says, look, this is really what it means. When we talk about flowing of milk and honey, so we're saying that the land is good, the air is good, it's great, it's a great place to be. It's, I'm gonna move down a little bit, but also that the land is great for grazing, for livestock animals, for any sorts of animals. They've got good air, great grass for grazing, good water. They've got good terroir, if you will. And that these animals can be happy, they can be well fed, well watered, and they will produce good milk for our consumption. And then not only that, but that there will be really great agriculture, right? That there will be really good trees growing. It's great conditions for growing trees, fruiting trees, and we can just eat off of the fat of the land, as it were. That we've really got it's good terroir. We've got good land, we've got good water, good air, and these all combine to make a great agricultural region. So it's one thing for really, it's one thing to have a land, even it can be a massive, vast, huge piece of land, but if there's no agricultural ability to feed ourselves, to feed our families, then ultimately, what good does it do, right? And so this expression, a land of here, let's get this up. That again, a land, Eretz, so in Hebrew it's Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash, a land of flowing milk and honey, or we can even say a land of oozing milk and honey. That the milk and honey would be just so plentiful, it would be coming out of the fruits and the goats, and that we would just have more than enough. Not only more than enough, but more than we would necessarily know what to do with. And that ultimately is what this blessing and description of the land is intended to really express, that it's great for the grazing animals, the livestock, as well as for agricultural as well. So for getting foods. I hope you enjoyed this. I think if I am correct, this is the very first Village Torah session that's just been me talking to you. I hope it's been all right, and I'm really excited. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope that now, whenever you encounter this expression again, a land of flowing or oozing milk and honey, you'll have a much better appreciation of the phrase, of the expression, and I hope you, I don't know, I hope it brings you meaning and understanding. So thank you so much for watching, and I want to wish you a Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.